David Coote's career as an elite referee seemingly come to an end after his contract was terminated for behaviour that left his position, quotes, untenable. Now, of course, we know what has happened with David Coote. He was suspended after a video emerged showing him referring to former Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp as a German, and then a word I cannot mention. And then the Sun newspaper also published a video in which Coote appeared to snort a white powder while he was on UEFA duty working as a match official at Euro 2024. Now, of course, you didn't need to be well inspired to think that this would be the end for David Coote, and it is the end for him. But there has been a wall of silence virtually from the PGMOL, his employer. Shortly after the original video came out regarding Klopp and his comments on Klopp and Liverpool, Howard Webb, the head of the PGMOL, went on their own mic'd up show, and he said this.
We became aware, Leon, of a video that was being circulated on social media that we are taking very seriously. We've instigated a full investigation. One of our referees, David Coote, has been suspended with immediate effect pending the outcome of that investigation. There's not much more I can say at this stage until we work through that investigation.
And now David Coote has been sacked. Now, the PGMOL statement that goes with that news says, following the conclusion of a thorough investigation into David Coote's conduct, his employment with the PGMOL has been terminated with immediate effect. But Simon, that's all that the PGMOL is saying. That's virtually all. Yeah. Supporting David Coote continues to be important to them, and we remain committed to his welfare. David Coote has a right to appeal the decision to terminate his employment. Yeah. But Webb said in the mic'd up show, that's all we can say at the moment because there is an investigation underway. And now, all they're saying is in statement form, following the conclusion of a thorough investigation. In other words, we're hearing nothing more from Howard Webb.
Well, the questions were about what was going to happen to David Coote, and the questions have been answered. David Coote has been removed from his employment. The balance between playing to the gallery and changing certain things and tightening up and filling the vacuum, I think, has to be found. So it's important that they do message. They do have some messaging about what they're perhaps going to do to avoid any circumstances like this there in the future, without suggesting that these circumstances are prevalent and would be repeated again anyway. So he's got to get the balance right. Now, what he was answering on the mucked up situation, what was going to happen with David Coote, he's answered it. We fired him.
Yeah.
And what we would like to do is say, okay, well, is it systemic? Is it a challenge? And if they steer into that narrative...
And these are relevant questions.
Well, they are and they aren't. Because, again, it comes down to localised. If someone has done something as an individual, it doesn't mean... If we want to extrapolate anything, if you want to have a bad radio presenter in a show, does it mean every single radio presenter on every single show is subsequently bad? It doesn't mean that at all. So I do concur with the view that there's a vacuum and it probably needs to be filled with something like, this is what we're going to do going forward, but we don't have a systemic problem. We had a localized problem. We don't have it in the entirety. It doesn't question the integrity of our refereeing. It's a regrettable situation.
You're saying that, and we needed Webb to say that this morning.
Well, I think he has said that. I think they have said things to some extent about the nature of the fact this isn't something that pervades the refereeing fraternity.
Well, here we go then. The former head of the PGMOL is Keith Hackett, who joins us live. Keith, good morning to you. Would you have fronted up more on this, do you think, Keith?
I think that what is a difficulty for Howard Webb is that David Coote still has a right of appeal. And I don't think it would be right for Howard to come out and, if you like, prejudice that appeal. I do think, however, and I think Simon's spot on, I do think that he needs at some point to come out and say, look, this is a localised situation. It's a one-off. And we've checked through various processes and procedures. They've got to look at the, if you like, criteria and contract of employment to see whether they need to do anything else. My view was, initially, I think I still stay by it, it's not saying that everybody and everyone is a drug addict in that sense, but I think that if the PGMOL brought into their process the fact that these are athletes, and if you're a football player on the field of play, you're subject to WADA and drug testing. And I think if he'd have said, look, we've tested our guys, they're all clear, and in the future going forward, we're going to operate under WADA. Now, the thing is, if taking drugs, how can that influence their performance? I think there's lots of questions to be asked, but I think they could have taken some action that actually says, look, this is what we've done. Going forward, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, but Keith, you just said there, I think there are lots of questions to be asked. That's my very point, that there are still a number of questions that remain unanswered about the very integrity of the PGMOL, which Webb fronts up.
Well, he certainly fronts up, but remember that the board of directors of the PGMOL are made up of the Football Association, the Premier League, and the Football League. They're not going to rest on that. They interrogate everything that Howard Webb does, and they play a part in that process. I think one of the questions, Jim, is that I think initially someone said that this was actually these clips that were in the social media were shown about 4 years ago. If they were, I think I'd ask, was there a cover-up at that particular time? I think the old scenario is that he is an employee. They have a duty of care towards him. I think they've recognised that. And I would be making every effort for the fans and for everyone else to show that the remainder of the referees are without a problem.
I mean, if that is true about when this video was actually made,
yeah,
there are many questions to be asked.
Of others, not Howard Webb.
Of others, Simon, absolutely. But the point still remains that they cannot still surely carry on with a wall of silence, as Keith rightly says. Yes, sure. Well, Coote has the right to appeal the decision to terminate his employment,
and that's a good point. And that appeal will.
That's a good point, but that still doesn't prohibit Webb from speaking to us.
Well, it does,
or anybody else.
Well, it does, because ultimately, as Keith has pointed out, if somebody still has a right to appeal, you don't want to prejudice it in the same way that in the media terms, if something's sub judice, you can't comment.
But there's a wider conversation to be had, and if he's careful with his words, he won't prejudice the situation.
He's not going to be able to be careful with his words, because you and others like you are not going to allow him to be. So why put himself in that position until he's got all his I's dotted and his T's crossed? The bottom line is we first of all, when we talk about VADA, or WADA, or more likely UCAD in this instance, this is not performance enhancing. This is recreational drugs that this person fell foul of, and ultimately that's a different dynamic. That's about them being fit for purpose rather than abusing the system and using steroids or drugs to enhance their performances. Yes, the balance has to be that they probably need to fill that void. They've also got to be careful of the existing workforce, because there's hundreds of referees that are not guilty of by anything, and they want to be very careful that there isn't this all of a sudden this blanket reaction from the PGMOL that victimises a group of referees that are looking at this going, well, why have we got the Coote effect? Why have we got to have the ramifications of one individual's behaviour? The motivations behind why these videos have come into the public domain are disturbing. I think they probably relate more to his private life and the circumstances in his private life than they do to his professional, and why they're finding their way out there. Who knows? But the content of them. The more concerning aspects are not about whether he doesn't like Jurgen Klopp, or whether he's called him a rude name, or whether, he's done recreational drugs in his private life, are the allegations about yellow cards being distributed and things of that nature for betting companies. That's a more disturbing situation, because that's where the integrity and the credibility of the PGMOL refereeing fraternity comes into play. And there needs to be some thought processes, and some very clear thought processes. We talked about the Premier League's reaction to Manchester City overturning the APT rules, and there was this reaction that it needs to be thought through. The PGMOL need to think through clearly how they're going to respond, and then come back with a blueprint of what it looks like going forward, so that it doesn't come a cropper again with an individual referee.
In a previous statement, Keith, to The Sun, David Coote said, whatever issues I may have had in my personal life, they have never affected my decision making on the field. I've always held the integrity of the game in the highest regard, refereeing matches impartially and to the best of my ability. Do you believe that, Keith?
I'd like to believe it. I do believe it, because I know the system's in place. Look, on the gambling front, remember that there is a very clear, and I put it in when I was boss of the PGMOL, gambling on football is banned worldwide. And because I signed up with the laptops and with the mobile phones, and we know the processes of betting companies. I'm pretty confident that that is not affected. But when someone comes out and says a yellow card might have been impacted, then I think, well, that is clearly not the PGMOL's problem. That is the Football Association now, who I believe must still be investigating that aspect of the claim that was made. Simon's absolutely right. The integrity of all the match officials is so important. We've got 30,000 referees in England. We have a great reputation across the world. Yes, it's difficult. We see errors made. They are human. I'm convinced at the moment VAR is not operating correctly and well. I want to know where the semi-automated system is that will help that process. It was promised in November. It's not arrived. I think there are many other questions that Howard Webb has to answer, but I do think he's got to hold on to what he says, much as he would want to come out.
I get you. Keith, in a couple of sentences, do this for me then. With wearing your former PGMOL hat right now, what has this Coote situation done in terms of harm to your profession?
Well, I think it makes life more difficult, and it makes social media even more active on every questionable decision. We've all got a view about the decisions that are made by referees on the field of play. It just makes life a bit more difficult, not necessarily for the professional referees, because they're protected. It's the grassroots referees that suffer when parents question every decision they make.
Keith Hackett, not for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. Keith Hackett, the former head of the PGMOL. How do you feel about it now that Coote is sacked? Is this the final line drawn under the whole debacle, or do questions around wider integrity remain unanswered? You might want to pop me a message on that, 81089. Simon, too many messages, too many text messages, even calls coming in on the David Coote situation, so it would be crazy to move on at this stage. As we know, the Premier League referee David Coote sacked by the PGMOL following, quotes, a thorough investigation into his conduct. We know about the video. The video emerged of him allegedly showing him making derogatory comments about Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp. And then, what do you know? We saw a sequence of him allegedly appeared to show Coote sniffing a white powder through a rolled up US banknote. Many people getting in touch. My point is Howard Webb didn't say much in the Mic'd Up show because of the investigation that was pending. And now that the investigation has come and gone and we're told it was extremely thorough, we're still not hearing from Howard Webb, although we know that Coote has the right to appeal the decision to terminate his employment. There's one message in the first line of it took my eye, because it's not often I see this. Jim, you're right, Simon is wrong. What? There are questions to be answered. Which of the three incidents has Coote been sacked for? His video about Klopp and Liverpool? Fair enough. That makes his position as a referee untenable. His drug use. If we equate this to footballers, they've been suspended, not sacked, so it would be harsh if he was sacked for that.
Does it matter?
If it's his conversation about yellow cards, well, that does make his position untenable.
Does it matter? What is this person, an employment lawyer? Does it matter? He clearly has brought himself and his position into disrepute. So he's got fired for one of the three of them. The fact which one he's got fired to me seems like a moot point. He deserved to be fired, didn't he? I mean, let's have a look at it. And on the prima facie and what we've seen through the media, it's very difficult to make a case for him not to be fired. And I'm not in the offended camp because he doesn't like Jurgen Klopp. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that's a reason for being fired, but for putting himself in the way of saying the most ridiculous and absurd things and putting himself in the way of these things are part and parcel of it. But I think it's incidental about which one of them he got bloody fired for.
But that's why we need a bit more detail on
this.
Because a vacuum,
so we can pour over it and turn it into something for us.
No, not
absolutely, absolutely.
Turning something for us.
Yes, because we can turn it into media content.
What do we want out of it?
Media content.
What does it mean, media content?
But what is the benefit of knowing this information? He clearly, by the very nature of
content, it's everywhere, Simon.
Yeah, I understand that. But what do we want it for? Do we want it for so that we're so philanthropic in our thinking that we're desperate? We've got clarity.
Balance.
The guy's been fired. What we want to know is it a problem going forward? Does it represent other officials? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is no,
that's what we do want to know.
But how do we know that? Or what we're going to do? Interview every single referee?
Kevin's a Leeds United fan. Kevin, what do you want to say in this? Good morning.
Morning, gents. You all right?
Good, thank you.
Couple of points, really. I'll keep them quick.
Yeah.
Regarding Simons, it doesn't matter what he's being fired for. I think it does, because it's a clear evidence that David Coote thinks is above reproach. There's 3 different breaches there, all of completely different nature, so it's not an accident. He just thinks he can do what he wants. The door's being wedged open on the PGMOL, and the only way they're shutting that door is by answering questions, and the public's put the foot in the way. Excuse the metaphor. They can't shut that door. They need to answer questions. An inquiry should be done throughout the PGMOL to make sure that this is not just an incidental finding and a one-off with David Coote. Make sure all the other refs are squeaky clean, because let's not forget, they are running probably the richest sport in the world, and these men are in charge of making real key decisions. And if they're not trusted on the pitch by the fans, then the game's gone. So an inquiry needs doing. Referees need to be squeaky clean. They need to be coming out and saying, we've done our investigation on everybody. Yes, it's fine. Yes, is it unfair? Yes, does it make a mockery? But that's the world we live in, gentlemen. I couldn't get away with it. And I'm not suggesting this for one moment. But if Simon had a business partner that was done for tax evasion, I'm pretty sure Simon would be investigated because they're connected, even though he's done nothing wrong. So on that principle, the rest of the referees need investigating, thanks to David Coote. The sorry state of affairs, but that's where we are.
Okay, Kevin, thank you for the points you've made. Chris is a Manchester United fan. Chris, if you can keep it brief for me, mate, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, my opinion is that we take everything way too far these days. I think they've done their investigation. They've sacked David Coote. He's obviously done a plethora of errors. Let's just move on. And anything that they need to do with individual investigations, do that internally. Do it on the side. I just think we take things too far. Someone makes a mistake and then we want to change the world. Just get on with it.
Okay, move on we will. Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. There's a kind of difference of opinion in the messages that are coming in,
I
Simon.
think there is, given the nature of the public domain facing business, I think there is a need for there to be an internal evaluation and perhaps a public report after it. I tried my very best not to jump up on the shut the door and do my Larry Grayson impression that the other fellow was talking about in terms of got to shut that door. But I do think he has an element of point in it. We are talking about the officials that police the game. If you do lose that faith and that jeopardy, it wasn't lost in Italy when Italy had all the corruption of match officials in the 90s. It hasn't been lost in Spain when we've seen the head of the refereeing fraternity on Barcelona's payroll and ultimately redeploying money further down the pyramid to other referees. So it hasn't been lost, but he is right. This is a different business by a different set of standards, so they should deal with this. They should look at it. They should produce an internal inquiry as to how referees are managed and motivated and disciplined and coordinated in their private lives, and these sort of events can be reported upon. But that has a time and a place. And you can't do it instantaneously. You have to deal with the David Coote situation in isolation, remove him from the equation, and then evaluate what you think is the best course of action to be able to ensure that they themselves don't find themselves in disrepute.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.